I was afraid I'd scare you all away last week. Well, I just gave you a huge amount of information. But to some extent it's necessary, because what you have is the way it's laid out necessitates a comparison. So you've got this symbolic representation, and that has to be laid alongside history, and it has to fit with the sequence of events that occur historically. And the symbolism has to fit that, which means that there's a timeline that you're observing, an historical timeline that has been described in symbolic terms. And so you have to look at Daniel like that, and it's worth it from the standpoint that this was written over 500 years before Christ. It was written probably, you could say, approximately 600 years, really, if you take the full amount of time before the kingdom was actually established. This is about the end of the Babylonian kingdom, which was after the time of this particular prophecy, was 536, and Jesus, of course, died AD 33. So you're looking at a 600-year spread for the kingdom actually being established when Jesus came. So it's got that timeline, and it's got that symbolism. And the symbolism is very important, and you can't just decide what symbolism means. The symbols are pretty much revealed throughout Scripture for what they are. And for example, a horn means power. A star means rule. And you've got Numbers 24:17, and then you just go through that. I've done this a little bit with other things, but just to go through this particular symbolism to explain, because I think it's a very obvious one, and it's easy to see when it comes to actual symbolism. And it's put in a wonderful way, Numbers 24:17, because it says, "I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near." So this is, you're pretty much looking at 1400 years before Christ, when this prophecy of Christ has been delivered by Balaam, and not because he wanted to, but it continues on and it says, "A star shall come forth from Jacob. A star shall come forth from Jacob. A scepter shall rise from Israel." Now it's quite easy to see that a star represents rule there. Not so. The symbolism is easy to understand. And of course, it talks about a scepter shall rise from Israel. Again, it's symbolic. What does the scepter represent? Again, rule. A king represents a king. And so, because a scepter is the rod that represents the authority of the king. And so you've got that symbolism, which is, you can follow the symbolism, you can understand the symbolism. So when you come to Daniel, and in particular these type of sections of Daniel, you've got that symbolism being represented and laid, and you've got to look at the symbolism, and you've got to look at the history, and you've got to put the one next to the other, recognizing the third aspect, that it gives you a timeline. And it's a timeline of 4 kingdoms, and we went into some detail about those 4 kingdoms. But we recognize that the time when the kingdom was going to be established, that would never end, would occur in the 4th kingdom, which would be the Roman kingdom. It had to be the Roman kingdom. And so it talks about that. And it talks about horns, which of course represent power. And the horns are essentially kings. And we'll go a little bit more into that. And it's saying during the time of those kings, of the 4th kingdom, then the kingdom is going to be established. And then, in the midst of that, it talks about, first of all, talks about God, gives a presentation of God in verse 9 and 10. And then from verse 13, it describes the ascension of Jesus. Jesus going up into the clouds of heaven. And in actual fact, verse 13, if you look at verse 13 again, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like the Son of Man was coming, and he went up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And then it talks about the kingdom being established. And Jesus also uses this with regard to the Son of Man and the clouds of heaven to describe himself. And I mentioned that briefly, but I was giving you a huge amount of information, so I just want to focus a little bit quickly on that. So if we turn to Acts chapter 1, what we see first of all is the ascension in verse 9. Acts chapter 1 verse 9. And after he said these things, he was lifted up while they were looking on, and a cloud received him out of their sight. So clouds always are representative of the majesty of God, of representing the heavens. And then they're intently watching that in verse 10. And then in verse 11 it says, they also said, this is two men in white clothing, messengers of God. In verse 11, these messengers say, they also said, men of Galilee, why do you stand looking up into the sky? This Jesus who has been taken from you up into heaven will come in the same way as you've watched him go into heaven. In other words, how will he come? On the clouds. Is that a reasonable conclusion to say that? Alright, so you've got the idea about coming on the clouds, or going on the clouds, representing the ascension or the return of Jesus. And you see it also in Matthew chapter 24, when Jesus is talking about his return in verse 30. And by the way, this is the only sign of the appearing of Jesus, is his actual appearing. There's a lot of confusion about signs, especially from Matthew 24, which is dealing with different issues, of dealing with the destruction of Jerusalem quite a bit. And also the return of Jesus, because the disciples have asked questions which conflated those ideas, the destruction of Jerusalem and the return of Jesus. So, talking about his return in verse 30, he says, and then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. It's the only sign you'll get about the coming of Jesus. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. That statement means what? It's going to be, everybody's going to know, right? Everyone's going to know. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. So that's Jesus talking about his return, coming on the clouds with power and great glory. And he actually uses that again in Matthew chapter 26, when he's before Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin, before the Sanhedrin. In verse 64, Jesus said to him, you have said it yourself, nevertheless I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power, coming on the clouds of heaven. All right, so you can see that idea. But in Daniel chapter 7, it's talking about the ascension side of things. And he talks about, verse 13, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with clouds of heaven, one like a Son of Man was coming, and he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. So you see that idea. So inserted in this fourth kingdom, and these 10 horns, these 10 kings of the fourth kingdom, you see the kingdom being established. So it's a very specific timeline. And essentially what it is saying, to put it in very simple terms, that the kingdom was going to be established in the time of the Roman Empire. In other words, in the time of the Messiah. And what time was that? When the Messiah had ascended into heaven and was ruling, and it was talking about it there, and verse 14, and to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom. So once he's ascended, what does he get? Glory and a kingdom that will never end. So it puts it in that very specific timeline of the first century. It's very important to see that, because there's a huge amount of confusion about the kingdom and when the kingdom is going to be established. And we've just gone through Hebrews, and that's quite valuable for this study as well, because Hebrews chapter 12 talks about the kingdom. And the fact that it's a kingdom that cannot be shaken, which means what? What does that mean? That a kingdom that cannot be shaken. Any word? Sorry? Yes. In other words, it's not a physical kingdom, because it compares it to Sinai and the earth being shaken. And now you've got something that cannot be shaken. Right? Why? Because it's eternal, which means it's not physical, because this physical world is not eternal. And so you've got that. Just have a look at Hebrews, just by way of reminder, chapter 12. And verse 28. And what does the writer say here? Therefore, since we receive a kingdom which cannot be shaken, a kingdom which cannot be shaken. Verse 26, what did he say? And his voice shook the earth, but now he's promised, saying, yet once more I'll shake not only the earth but the heaven. So that what? Verse 27, yet once more denotes the removing of those things which can be shaken. In other words, the removing of the physical universe. As of created things, physical universe. So that none of those things, so that those things which cannot be shaken remain. In other words, the spiritual kingdom. So this is not a physical kingdom. And this is where the huge misunderstanding is with most evangelical churches, is they are looking forward to a time where Jesus is going to come and establish his kingdom on earth, in physical Jerusalem. And yet the scripture is clearly telling us that this is not a physical kingdom, that we are part of spiritual Jerusalem, right? Not physical Jerusalem, but spiritual Jerusalem. It's not a physical kingdom, it's a spiritual one. It's spiritual Zion, and that's what we've got to be looking at. All right. So, and that's why in Galatians as well, Galatians chapter 4 and verse 26, let me start with verse 25. Now this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present Jerusalem. In other words, physical Jerusalem. For she is in slavery with the children. But the Jerusalem above is free. She is our mother. So you've got this very clear concept in the New Testament that we are part of spiritual Jerusalem. So you always hear people talking about, the pre-millennials will always talk about the fact that Jesus is going to come back and he's going to establish his kingdom in Jerusalem. Not going to happen. We already are part of that kingdom of Zion, of Jerusalem, but it's Jerusalem that is above, that is free, that has freed us. Okay? It's a spiritual kingdom that cannot be shaken, according to Hebrews. It's that kingdom that's eternal. It's that kingdom that's a stone that's cut out not of human hands. It's not a physical kingdom. So it's a very clear idea in Scripture, and yet somehow people just cannot get it, and they still have this expectation. And as a result of that, Daniel becomes a very difficult book for them. Because you've got to have somehow this timeline. You can't figure out the timeline, really. Because you've got to extend it beyond the first century and even beyond today. Okay? Because they're still waiting for this. And so you've got to figure out 10 kings. Now, what 10 kings are these? And they've got to try and figure out, oh, maybe it's there's some kind of 10 kingdoms related to Rome in some way or another. Okay? Because that takes away the timeline and creates a lot of confusion. But if you stick to the timeline, 4 kingdoms, and then in the 4th one, the Roman one, this eternal kingdom is going to be established. And it's going to be established, according to Daniel, after the ascension of Jesus, which is showing here. Yes, sir.
So in other words, the coronation of Jesus
Yes.
as king was after the ascension.
Yes. That's what this is saying. You know, that he's presented before the Ancient of Days. You know, and to him was given dominion, glory, and the kingdom. And of course, the kingdom started with the coming of the Holy Spirit, and you know, the kingdom starts with subjects, right? When do the subjects begin to come into the kingdom? On the day of Pentecost. Yeah.
So he was not a king
Yes.
when he was still here on earth, because they kept on saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?"
Yes.
And he became king. He was crowned
Yes.
by the Ancient of Days.
Yes.
After he had ascended, and he who ascended also descended.
Yeah, and you've got this idea as well in John. When he's talking to, and that's another very, very good one, when he's talking to Pilate, and Pilate's asking him about it, and in verse 36, in response to Pilate, because Pilate asks him, he says, verse 33, therefore Pilate entered again into the praetorium and summoned Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Okay, that's the question. Jesus said, "Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate says, "I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priest delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world." My kingdom is not of. It's a very obvious one. It's just, you know, I mean, how much clearer can you make it than that? My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting, so I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. What realm? The physical. Yeah, the physical realm. Now, you know, I've just given you a few scriptures on that. So I think that's quite clear, isn't it? Okay. The big deal about this, and anytime you're having a discussion with people about this who are pre-millennial, then take them to the scripture that is clear, because often they'll go to Revelation and they misunderstand Revelation. And probably more nonsense has been spoken about Revelation than any other book ever written. Again, because the symbolism is not understood. And a lot of the symbolism in Revelation comes from books like Daniel and Ezekiel and Zechariah. Okay? So, but people don't understand that. So, in order you get your understanding first from scripture that is clear and unambiguous and not symbolic. And that's the scriptures that I've been giving you from the New Testament. Right? That's clear scripture, which indicates that we are part of a spiritual kingdom, not of this realm. It's not a kingdom that can be shaken. It's not of this realm. It's not of this world. It's like, how many times can I say this? It's like, how many times in the scripture have to say this, right? So you've got that picture, and when does it all come? When do all the pieces of the puzzle come together? With the ascension. You could argue, brother Justice, that essentially all the pieces were in place with the resurrection, and you'd be right. But it's like there's an unfolding there's a sequential aspect to it as well. That you've got the resurrection, you've got the ascending into heaven, and then you've got the day of Pentecost. And as a reality of the kingdom, Jesus is king, but a king with subjects happens on the day of Pentecost.
And even Ephesians 4, verse 11,
Yes.
it also gives you this idea. He who ascended
Yes.
also descended.
Yes.
And he gave gifts to men.
Yes.
He gave some to the apostles, some to the evangelists, some to
Yes.
the prophets, some to prepare God's people for the works of service.
Yes.
But when did he give them this gift? He had to first ascend.
Ascend and give the Holy Spirit.
And he descended.
Yes.
And when did he descend? Acts chapter 2.
Yes.
We see him giving and imparting the gift of the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
So that idea is very clear, but you see what place confusion that I face.
Yes. I don't think you mentioned where that was, did you?
Ephesians, I did.
Did you say that?
Yeah.
I didn't quite hear it,
Yeah, it's the rain.
It's the rain.
People around here.
Okay, Ephesians chapter 4.
Verse
Yeah.
11 going down.
Yes.
But I think what creates confusion
Yes.
is this idea, I don't know, maybe we did explain it last week, the idea of the end of times.
Yes.
The end times.
In times.
Yes, because people, whenever they hear the idea of the end times,
Yes.
automatically they're thinking the second coming of Christ.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
And I don't know if it's mentioned here in chapter 7, but I guess it is mentioned somewhere here, where it talks about, is it verse 12? An appointed period. This one, the Bible says, for an appointed period of time. Chapter 7, verse 12, it says now. You see, most people get it twisted and they think it refers to the second coming, you know,
Yeah.
the end times, you know. And I think that's when most of this confusion with the pre-millennialists
Yeah.
and the other witnesses and all these things, they talk about or the last days.
Yes.
You know? And people don't understand where are the last days.
Yes.
We are in the last days.
Yes. Yes. And we've been in it since the kingdom was established.
We've been in since the day of Pentecost,
Yes.
when Prophet Joel's prophecy was confirmed
Yes.
that in the last days, when are the last days? From Acts 2 of the day of Pentecost
Yes.
until Jesus Christ comes.
Until Jesus comes again.
So when they hear the last days, they're thinking about the second coming. Or
Yeah.
when they hear the end time,
Yeah.
automatically people think of the end time being. But it's an end of an era. It's an end of an
So
era.
it's a new era, it's the last era, therefore it's the end times. This is the final era. And therefore it's the last times. And that's what's meant even in the Old Testament when it uses the last days. It's generally referring to the time of the Messiah, not the end of the world. Generally speaking, that's what it refers to. Okay, so yeah, that's a very good point. On
And
that.
second thing about it,
Yeah.
after this, what will come?
Yes, yes.
The end. After this,
Which is, of course, what he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15.
yes.
And then he talks, there he's talking about the second coming. And essentially he's saying, then comes the end, when the kingdom will be given back to God. This bride of Christ, which is described in Ephesians chapter 5, is then going to be given to God in its completion. So when he comes again, it's not to establish a kingdom, but to give the kingdom to God, okay, after the resurrection. So you've got that whole idea. So it's a very complete, it's a very complete idea and described, in some detail. So, and this is in some detail and has historical connections. And so the idea is, and as I said, to some extent, I'm delivering it to people, many of whom think history is a big yawn, and I'm the worst person to deliver it to some extent because I love history. So I don't understand people who don't love history. It's like, how could we not love history? But you have to align the symbolism and the four kingdoms with history. So you've got a very constrained timeline that you can't extend it beyond essentially the first century. You can't. That's when it will happen. Okay? And it goes on to talk about the destruction of the Roman Empire. And so it talks about that whole idea. In verse 11, then I kept looking because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. I was talking about Vespasian. I kept on looking until the beast was slain, not the little horn, the beast. And what is the beast? The Roman Empire. Remember, there's 4 beasts, and the 4th one is the Roman kingdom. And so you've got this very boastful emperor, and he looks beyond his time until the beast was slain, and his body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. And so Rome basically ruled for about 500 years until those barbarians, the Germanic tribes, overran it. And so that was the end of that. Then, as I say, you're talking about the kingdom being established then. Why is this all useful? I mean, what does it all matter, really? It's there to show you that this is from God. Because only God can establish this timeline. Human beings cannot predict things in this kind of broad scope and great detail 500, 600 years in advance. 500 to 600 years in advance. It's not possible for human beings to do this. Okay? Not possible. So therefore, what this is saying, this is God's book. Okay? So sometimes the Christian faith is criticized because, if you take all the books, Old Testament and New Testament, you've got a writing period of approximately 1,500 years. Okay? Lots of books over a 1,500-year process. Of course, Genesis is much older and would have initially been oral until writing and then written down, and then Moses basically put it together along with the rest of the first 5 books. But you're looking at about 1,500 years, approximately. And so people will criticize and say, well, different authors, different periods of time, and yet there's an incredible unity to those books. Only God can achieve that kind of unity. So a lot of times people criticize that and say, well, the Quran was written pretty much one period. But it's got no backing. But prophecy and fulfillment backs up this book as being from God. Absolutely backs it up as being from God. And prophecy and fulfillment is a huge part of why we know this is God's book. And so when you've got something like this that is so broad in scope, kingdoms over a period of 500 years plus, and descriptions of what they like. So it's not as if, Brother Tundani, it's not as if he just says, there's going to be 4 kingdoms to come. Okay. Or at least 3 kingdoms, because Babylon was already in existence. It's not as if he's going to say, okay, you're going to disappear and there's going to be 3 kingdoms after you, and then the 4th one, the kingdom's going to be established. But he actually describes these kingdoms and gives you details, in symbolic terms, gives you details about these things. So, in other words, the detail is incredible. When you lay the symbolism alongside history, then you know this book is from God. So it's there to actually let you know, yes, this is from God. And that should give you certainty. It's not just any holy book. It's God's book. And He's given it through men to write down over time. And it has this thematic unity that we call salvation history, which unfolds and finds its ultimate fulfillment in the person of Jesus Christ, who then dies and is resurrected and becomes this Messiah, this Lord in Christ, who is seated at the right hand of God and is ruling over His kingdom, which we normally call the church. So, do you think it's uplifting? It should be. Okay, quite powerful. As I said, on the one hand, I think, okay, I've given you an information overload, or on the other hand, am I just giving you, am I just reiterating too much? I'm giving you too much. They over this idea too much. Doesn't know meaning? Too much. Too much information. I'm an information guy, so if anybody's going to give you too much information, that's me. If I've given you enough information that you get it, then I'm at least happy. Alright, so you see from verse 15, let's just read 15 to 18. Does anybody want to read that? We've got Daniel open, Daniel chapter 7.
As for me, my spirit was distressed within me, and a vision in my mind kept alarming me. I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking me the exact meaning of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. These great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kingdoms who will rise from the earth. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, for all ages to come.
That's a good summary statement of what we've read already. And Daniel found that a lot of this quite disturbing because there's a lot of violence here that's represented in these 4 kingdoms. And so he's seeing this, and it's quite distressing for him. This is a big thing to dump on one person. Even somebody like Daniel, who can say he's a bit distressed about it. And so he wants to know more information about the 4th beast, because this is the critical axis upon this whole prophecy. So this is when the kingdom is going to be established, it will never end. So he wants to know a little bit more about that. So if we read from verse 19 through 22.
Then I desired to know the exact meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its claws of bronze, and which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, and before which 3 of them fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth uttering great bones, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them. Until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one. And the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom.
Right. And so, he wants to know about this fourth king. Now, what's interesting is the Jews consider this beast, this incredible beast, this fourth kingdom, to be the kingdom of the Seleucids, and in particular Antiochus Epiphanes. So, who? Okay, Antiochus Epiphanes. And he's someone who actually desecrated the temple. He was one of the Greek rulers. You know, the Greek kingdom divides into 4 parts, and the Seleucids is one of them. And they basically have the Persian side of the kingdom. And what he does on one occasion, Antiochus Epiphanes, he goes in and he sacrifices a pig in the temple, and that causes the Maccabean revolt. And the books of Maccabees are what we call books of the Apocrypha, which are in Catholic Bibles, but no other. And the Jews have never accepted them as part of the canon either, as being inspired. But anyway, they give that history of the Maccabean revolt, the Jewish Maccabees, or the Jewish family who led the revolt against Antiochus Epiphanes and basically threw a Greek rule out of Judea. And they were independent from about 164, I think the date is, until 63 BC, when Pompey, a Roman general, conquered Jerusalem. So the Jews say, well, this is talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, all of this. But none of that kingdom was only a 1/4 kingdom of the Greek kingdom. So the Jews also understood the sequence up to a point. Babylon, Medes and Persians, Greek. But then they take one splinter of the Greek and they say that's the 4th kingdom. But it in no way represents this kind of power that's described in the 4th beast. Because this 4th beast is described as having this overwhelming, dominating power. Doesn't fit. Doesn't fit at all. Okay? It only fits the actual 4th kingdom which occurred. That's the Roman one. And there's no way that in the time, after the time of, or during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, that this kingdom was established that would never end. Because the Romans came and took back power, took the power away from the Jews and subjugated them. Okay? So it doesn't fit him either. But that's what the Jews try and make it happen. And then you've got others who try and project beyond and still looking to the future when the kingdom is going to be established in Jerusalem, which is never going to happen. Okay, it's not what the scriptures are teaching at all. Yes.
The teeth of iron.
Yes, teeth of iron. Yeah.
That
It crushes everything, yeah.
crushes everything, you know.
Completely ruthless.
And then in chapter 2,
Yes.
look at the teeth of iron again.
Yes. Yeah.
The Romans.
In fact, what's interesting with the Romans, one of the ways that they really beat the Celts, which is my ancestors, as I've said before, who covered a huge part of Europe, places like Gaul, was that the Romans had these iron swords and the Celts still had bronze ones. You know? So bronze can bend quite easily, so you can take a swipe at somebody and hit their shield, your sword might bend, and you have to put it down and push with your foot to straighten it out. By that time, the Roman comes with his iron sword and just goes. So that's just interesting that it's described like that. But in any case, you've got this whole idea that this is talking about the Romans and that incredibly powerful Roman Empire, which basically subjugated and pacified so much of the world. they kept the Germans on the other side of the river, and eventually those Germans crossed over and defeated them. But essentially, they ruled for about 500 years. That's an incredibly long time. An incredibly long time. So yeah, that's this terrible kingdom. And then you see the 10 horns, the 10 rulers. Either starts with Caesar, who's the first dictator, first emperor, and a lot of people say that Mark Antony is the next one, because of course he takes over for a while. And then you've got 10, which end with Vespasian. He's number 11. And he basically, in 1 year, 3 emperors are removed. So it gives that idea. So that's the one in verse 20. The other horn which came up before which 3 of them fell. 3 emperors in 1 year were removed. So they never managed to rule more than a couple of months each. And then Vespasian takes over. And I described Vespasian to you as well. So, and that's Vespasian. So he's the one who utters great boasts. And he says, and basically, what you've got with the Roman kingdom is, with Vespasian, is he's the one with the son Titus who essentially destroys Jerusalem, conquers Galilee, conquers Judea, destroys Jerusalem, destroys the temple. And what effectively is that? It's the end of the physical representation of the Old Testament covenant, the Mosaic covenant. That's what it is essentially. The temple is destroyed, never to be rebuilt. I personally don't think it'll ever be rebuilt, even though there's some talk of it. I personally don't think it's ever going to be rebuilt. But it's all destroyed, and all the records are destroyed. So the whole lineage of priests has been removed. And so you have that. Who does that? That's Vespasian who does that. So, and in verse 22 it says, until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one. And the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. So, essentially you're looking at the timeline of the first century. That you've got the subjugation of the nation, which was God's nation, the holy ones that were at first the Jews. And then that whole system is completely destroyed. It's first replaced spiritually by the actual kingdom. And then it's replaced also physically. It's removed physically in 70 AD. So in AD 33, you've got the spiritual replacement. And the saints of the highest one as Christians, then that kingdom is then established. But both the spiritual aspect, 33, and the physical aspects, 70, are taken away from the former people of God, the Jewish people. Okay? And what's left when that's all taken away? The actual kingdom is left. And that's what it's talking about. So the saints take possession of the kingdom. And Jerusalem is destroyed. Who destroys it? Vespasian and Titus destroy it. Okay? I went through that in quite a bit of detail the last time. But you can see that idea there. Right? Whoa, nobody's told me that we actually passed time. Okay. I thought, this is going on. We're way past time. I'm usually pretty good with time. All right. Let's close in prayer and finally, any prayers, any specific? Oh, by the way, this should be the last one for this year. This is the last study for this year. School closes, and the agreement we have when school closed, we don't have the Wednesday studies. Because that involves a principal, you would have to come and open for us. And so this will be the last study for the year. We'll start up again next year. And you'll have some time to contemplate the last 2 weeks until we see again.
I just want to pray of thanksgiving the operation of my son.
The operation of your son went well.
Yeah, now we pray for speedy recovery.
All right, excellent, and a speedy recovery. Pray for that as well.